Senate President Mitch Carmichael joins us by telephone. Good morning, Senator. How are you today?
Good morning. How are you? I'm a Patriots guy, by the way.
Oh, man. So you're the one out of the five here. What's your score in the game?
Well, I think this interview is over now, isn't it?
Bye, Mitch.
We're done. We're done.
How do you I just can't go against Tom Brady and Belichick. Those guys figure it out somehow. But
They do,
it'll be a
don't they?
high-scoring game, 34, 40.
Yeah, so we're all kind of in the same ballpark on that one, right? So February the 8th, everybody heads to Charleston to convene as the legislative session gets underway. Delegate Jason Barrett will be there, and as Senate President. Mitch, what do you expect to be the first item on the agenda?
Well, first, let me say good morning to Jason, and welcome back to Charleston. I look forward to working with you again. And Rob and Dave, it's always a pleasure to be on your show, and Mike is adding so much to the process here as well. The first and primary issue confronting West Virginia is perhaps in the 153-year history of our state, we are facing the most critical budget crisis that has been encountered in these years. And so that's front and center in terms of issues, and it affects all elements and all aspects of government services.
Well, that's the point that we've been making here with the last week or so of shows we've been doing. This is a gigantic number that needs to be backfilled here. So how are you going to do it?
Well, look, first, if you could just take a second to put the context around the number that we're facing, and I think this does it. We're $500 million short from revenue estimates that have been projected. So $500 million. Now, every penny that the state police in the entire state of West Virginia spends for all cruisers, all lab work, all employment, compensation, everything is about $80 million. So when we start talking about cutting $500 million out of the budget, that is an enormous, enormous impact on the people of West Virginia. And this government's too big. Absolutely, it's too big, and there are cuts to be made, and I commend this governor for saying that he is, at a minimum, going to cut about $400 million. And so, I want to send the message to the Eastern Panhandle folks from Charleston, from the Senate President's office, that we will stick with him on these cuts. We will help him make these difficult, tough decisions. What we want to do, as a context of that, is we cannot continue to make budget cuts year in and year out, and hope that this society is going to be okay and that our children are going to be educated and our roads are going to be maintained and so forth. We have to find a new tax structure in West Virginia that gets us away from this boom-bust economy as it relates to fossil fuel industry. And I'm confident that the new governor, Governor Justice, wants to move in that direction to where, we have a long-term sustainable budgeting process and revenue stream as opposed to this up and down.
David Welch.
Jason Barrett.
Mr. President, thanks for joining us. Certainly good to talk to you. And again, congratulations on being the Senate President. Where do you think some of these specific cuts are? It appears that everything that I've heard that the governor's budget is going to come out with about $500 million in cuts. Have you seen that budget, and where do you think some of these specific cuts are coming from?
Well, first, I have not seen the budget. I've met with the governor on several different occasions. We've talked in general terms, but I think we can all identify the fact that, David, you're in a $4 billion, roughly, general revenue budget. $500 million gets spread across every agency. And what we've seen in the past is that higher education has been targeted for unique and heavier cuts, and K through 12 has been off limits, as well as DHHR cuts. So those things are not going to be off limits now. There's no way to cut $500 million and not touch some of those sacred cows like K through 12, which is about $2 billion of our budget. Roughly half the general revenue budget is spent on, secondary education. So there's going to be cuts there, David, as well as in the optional programs that DHHR administers. And so those are painful cuts. The goal is to do that in the most compassionate, responsible, efficient manner that we continue to deliver the vital government services that our people demand, which are, in my view, public education, public infrastructure, public safety, and then a social safety net that ensures that those least fortunate among us are taken care of.
But when you start making, and by the way, this is David, Senator, when you start making cuts of that size, there are going to be some people that are going to be really ticked off. I mean, there's going to be some pushback to that, obviously, out there, in the land. What makes this seem politically palatable, though, is that you have a Democratic governor working with a Republican legislature, and so it has the appearance of bipartisanship. Does that make it easier than it was last time around?
Absolutely, yes. It does make it easier, but it makes it more. It takes the partisanship out of it. I mean, either one of the parties here, the legislature or the governor, could take a partisan aspect of this. And this governor, in my view, is doing the responsible thing. We cannot continue to operate government at a level that is above and beyond the revenue that we're obtaining. So you cannot continue to spend more than you are making. Any family recognizes that, and so those decisions, anytime you make cuts, gather a lot of opposition. You're exactly right, David. But the fact that this legislature, and at least from the Senate's perspective, and I feel confident that Jason and his colleagues in the House will not do this either, is we recognize this is a shared responsibility, and we are way past the partisanship, the solution to these problems being a partisan aspect. This requires talent and ability from both sides of the aisle, and I'm not going to leave the governor on this issue. I'm going to stick with him on this, and I feel that he'll stick with us, and we'll work through this together.
Mr. President, Mike Carl. In that same vein, I want to say that I think the thing that I like hearing from Governor Justice at the inauguration is probably the best thing I ever heard come from a Democratic governor being sworn in, and that is a point he made about the bloated, top-heavy higher or K through 12 public education system. And that statistic he gave, somewhere back in you compare the head count in the 70s or something with today, we only have half as many students and 10 times more bureaucrats in the Department of Education. I mean, that was stunning, and it looks like he's starting to act on that point as well. And that, I mean, I know you can't get it all, the whole $400 billion that way, but that was very encouraging to me.
Yeah, it is, Mike. You're exactly right. It was something that you don't normally hear from in a gubernatorial speech of any type. Particularly as it comes from the Democrat Party that has traditionally upheld the values of the teachers and those in the service unions that represent those elements of K through 12 education. He is willing to break the mold and fundamentally reshape the manner in which we deliver education services, because here's the thing, and you kind of touched on it when you mentioned the fact that we have declining enrollment in our schools. That's a byproduct of our declining population. We are the only state in the nation, the only state, now think about this, that has lost population over the last 50 years. In other words, West Virginia had more people in it in 1967, I guess, than they have in 2017. And we're the only state in the nation to have that disappointing statistic, while the rest of the nation, America, has virtually tripled in size. Now, there's a reason for that, and it's largely, and somebody might want to blame, oh, gosh, we've got these fossil fuel industries, and, the automation has made the declines in that area. True, but other states have endured the same scenario and have not suffered to the degree West Virginia has. So we have to fundamentally reform our tax structure, our civil justice system, our education system, and our regulatory climate in such a way that it encourages private sector expansion of jobs and opportunity in our state. Then these boom bust cycles and these legislative sessions in which we get together and say, how are we going to cut this budget, or who are we going to hurt this time? All that kind of thing goes away, and we start worrying about how to manage the growth and the opportunities in our state. That's what my vision is for our future.
Senate President Mitch Carmichael joining us by telephone. I received a question via text, and it's a pretty good question, so I'd like to relay it while I have the Senate President here and Delegate Jason Barrett as well. When they make cuts to a specific agency, do they have the ability to specify where the cuts are made in that agency? For example, in K through 12, can they say that the cuts are only to be made administratively? Too often these cuts are left up to the administrators to find out where they cut themselves, and they always end up cutting the bottom people receiving benefits instead of their own bloated administration. So, Delegate Barrett, Senate President Carmichael, what's the answer to that question?
Well, I don't want to monopolize it, Jason. If you want to,
go ahead.
Well, okay. There's a couple answers to that question. Actually, the point is, yes, we can make the specific requirements. The legislature can do that from Charleston and tell each individual county how to run their school system and where to make the cuts. That is completely within our purview. Do we want to do that is the second point. No. We do not want to do that. We do not want to, at least from my view, we do not want to tell the individual counties how to run your school system. In my view, that's part of the problem. From Charleston, West Virginia, is we have tried to mandate a bureaucratic enforcement of policies that are initiated from Charleston on the local school districts. What I want to do, and I think what Governor Justice's vision is also, is return control to the local entities to make the decisions that best suit your county. And if you don't like the way the county implements that scenario, replace your superintendent, replace your school board through the election process. But I don't believe it should come from legislators in the capital city of our state to tell each individual county how to manage their school system.
Do you concur, Jason?
Yes, absolutely. And we have, the Eastern Panhandle delegation had a meeting a couple of Saturdays ago where we talked to various groups that receive some state funding. And some of their concerns was that exactly what this text message was about, that the legislature has made cuts and it was really intended to cut out some of the bureaucracy, but the agency that's not the way the agency took it, and that's not the approach that they moved with. And I think that's because we had a governor that didn't support all those cuts, and certainly had agency and agency heads that didn't want those cuts. But now that we have a governor that's on board with significant cuts and his agencies, the agencies listen to the governor a lot more and cooperate with the governor a heck of a lot more than they would the House or Senate Finance Committees. So I think that we're going to have pretty much everyone on the same page with a lot of cuts. So I expect a lot of these cuts to be aimed at bureaucracy, like the Senate President and the governor has talked about in the education department, but also kind of across the board with bureaucracy in all the agencies.
Senator, it's back to David again. I'm interested, at the beginning of the conversation, you had mentioned something, and I'm not sure I got it right, but something about the need to find new ways of taxation. I don't think you said we're going to find new ways of taxing, but new ways of going about it. Can you talk in some detail about what that means and what the outcome of that, the hopeful outcome for that is?
Yes, great question, and thank you for allowing me to elaborate on that a little bit. Our tax, the manner in which we tax our citizens, everyone realizes that we have to have money to operate government. There are certain vital government functions that we have to have. So we tax the citizens of West Virginia to pay for those services: roads, education, public safety, all those things. But the manner in which we tax is so critical to either promoting growth and jobs and opportunity or deterring the growth of those jobs and opportunity. What we have found, David, and what is so exciting, I think, from a West Virginian's perspective, is there are other states that have empirically proven and have implemented policies that have put their states on a path of growth and prosperity. And it's primarily the elimination of the personal income tax, because that allows capital formation, and it taxes rather than taxing the productive activities of citizens. It shifts from an income tax to more of a personal consumption tax. So you would see an elimination or a great reduction in the personal income tax for instance, in West Virginia, and a higher consumer sales tax on products and services and so forth. And I want to just, if you're a person who's looking to say, how do I want to design my tax structure so that I promote growth and opportunity? And we look at Tennessee, we look at Texas, we look at Florida, we look at Washington State or Oregon, and we see these states that have eliminated or virtually eliminated the personal income tax are growing exponentially faster than other states that have a high personal income tax, like West Virginia. So I think we would be derelict in our duty as legislators to not examine the reasons why those states are growing, the populations are expanding, and the jobs and opportunity are flocking to those states, while West Virginia remains, and this is a key statistic, the worst performing per capita income state in America. So for us not to look at changing our tax structure would be a fundamental dereliction of our duty. And so we're intent on changing our tax structure and getting us on a growth trajectory, and it specifically involves the elimination of the personal income tax and a replacement with the consumer sales tax and some other changes around our taxes on business inventory and equipment.
And while you're on that topic, we actually, of course, have Mike Carl in studio, who's authored that Fair 55 tax plan, which I'm sure you've seen portions of, if not all of, Senate President Carmichael. Mike, do you feel like you're going to get some traction this year with that plan?
Oh, I've think it's being taken very seriously, and I've had substantive discussions, of course, with the Senate leadership and President Carmichael and his colleagues about it. And the other big piece of it, and I understand, and the income tax is the first priority, of course, is the personal property tax, and Senator Carmichael mentioned it, and that takes us back. Once you start dealing with that, then you have to go back to part of the plan there to get that relief is to shift the funding responsibility fully to the legislature. If this growth that's stimulated by the income tax breaks can enable the legislature to pay 100% instead of 75% of the thorough and efficient standard, and that allows us to start to exempt over time tangible personal property. But there's going back to the not the specific tax side, but the local control side. I hope in the discussion that what's not forgotten about my proposal, not as unique to me, but that money goes back to the counties as block grants, not as you have to do it this way. In other words, it really vindicate the point that President Carmichael made about not telling the counties how to run their schools.
Delegate Barrett, you're in the opposition party. As of February 8, you'll be in session hearing about this plan, and I'm sure several others as a way to help the state's economy. Is this something you think you might be able to get behind in part or in whole?
Well, I don't look at it as being the opposition party. I think that the Democrats will certainly work, or at least I will, work with the Republican leadership and administration, to work this problem out.
But they didn't last year, though, Jason. Really, they were kind of at odds with each other. And last year's House of Delegates, what's changed?
Well, there's certainly times to do. Well, yeah, I'm there. Mike just pointed at me.
Jim,
that's because you're his. That's because you're his delegate.
Jason Barrett, that's what's changed.
Well,
his wife voted for you, So,
well, I doubt she was the only one in the House. But I think that it was the first 2 years after, as we've heard so many times, 84 years of Democratic control, and the Democrats are upset about that I'm sure, and I'm sure that you will still see some opposition on the issues, and we will certainly disagree, and there's a time for that, but keep in mind that that the other side did that when we were in control. And, my friend, the Senate president, used to be the minority whip. And I've heard of some speeches that he gave and things that he did to. But
you're going to have a lot of groups and you're going to have a lot of people looking to your party, and you personally, I'm sure, who represent associations and groups and people, interested citizens, activist groups who really depend upon this government funding for their survival. I mean, you're going to get teachers lining up outside your door saying, they're screwing education, and I mean, you're going to have a lot to handle.
And you're right, $500 million on cuts. That's on paper right now, or that's, we don't know where these cuts are coming from.
No, we don't.
And there are certainly probably going to be cuts that me and the folks in my party really have opposition to making those cuts. So again, we haven't seen any of that, but once we do, if there are cuts to things that we feel are important, we're going to do our part to oppose those.
Senate President Mitch Carmichael, thank you so much for joining us in this segment, and on the behalf of all of us in the studio, all the best in the legislative session coming up.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you for your well wishes, and I look forward to putting West Virginia on the right path to growth and prosperity.
Thank you, sir.